Today we're doing an introduction to the Kabbalah. We're going to be learning about the source of Kabbalah, but not just learning the source. I want to go one step further and to talk about how we know Kabbalah is true. So we're going to put it together, both what's the source of Kabbalah and also how do we know this stuff's real? How do we know this isn't just a bunch of, mystical, I need a good word, heebie-jeebie. I want to say huggabaloo or something. Like, how do we know this stuff's real? And especially when Kabbalists, sometimes say things that affect our daily life. Like, for example, a great Kabbalist said we don't wear tefillin. A Torah commandment, we don't wear tefillin on a holiday, like Sukkot holiday. You don't wear it all week. Passover, all week. We don't wear tefillin. Why? We always used to wear tefillin, but came along a great Kabbalist who said we don't wear tefillin on the holiday on the Passover or on Sukkot. What is the history of the Kabbalah? So let's start with our first Kabbalist. Our first Kabbalist in history is Adam. Adam is the first Kabbalist. Adam being this man who was kind of male-female, and it was decided by God that he should have a partner, like he should have a life partner who is known as Eve. But before Adam even had this partner called Eve, God brought to Adam all of the created things and just brought them up to Adam and said, please name them. And Adam looked at the things and saw them and was able to name them. And the Torah goes on to say that whatever he named them was their true name. Like that was their name. What's that supposed to mean? Meaning every time Adam named something, he got it right on the nose. That's the name. A little bit of a strange thing that the Torah says that was its name. But the idea behind it is that unlike water, for example, like I'm drinking water here, unlike water, which comes from the Germanic Wasser, which has nothing to do with water necessarily. It's a code, it's a symbol. The word water is a symbol to make us think of this stuff. Whereas the Hebrew word mayim, Adam would have seen water and he would say mayim, that's mayim. Because mayim is the water. He would see a dog, they brought a dog, God brought a dog up to him and he'd say, kelev, like a heart, loyal. It's the most loyal creature to human beings. There's no other creature like that. That's so loyal. It's kelev. He looked up at the sun and he saw it and he says, oh, shemesh. Shin is carbon, like shin is burning, like flames, with a mem in the middle, which is hydrogen, a burning ball of hydrogen. Shemesh. Yeah, he would look at the year calendar and shana. The word shana is shin, nun, hey. Shin and nun and hey equals 3. Shin is 300 and nun is 50 and hey is 5. 355 is the lunar calendar. Shana is the lunar cycle. 355. So whatever Adam was looking at was the thing that he was looking at. He was naming stuff. How did he know? How did Adam know this stuff? And the answer is, he's our first Kabbalist. He was a Kabbalist. And what does it mean he was a Kabbalist? He was able to see from one end of the world to the other. That's what it said about Adam. He would see from one end of the world to the other. What does it mean to see from one end of the world to the other? See, for us, we think one end of the world to the other means he saw, he saw from Jerusalem to the other end, which is, L.A. If you put a pin through the globe, it comes to right off the coast of Los Angeles in the Pacific out there. Yeah, so if you ever want to know what's the exact opposite values of Jerusalem, just go look in Los Angeles, you'll see. Adam didn't see distance. What Adam saw was through the worlds, through the parallel worlds, which is what the Kabbalah talks about, is that our world down here, this physical world, actually has parallel worlds above it that are projecting, God's projecting a light through the worlds, just like this light's projecting over my head. So it's projecting through, And that light then is hitting these worlds, which are then ultimately creating our physical world down here. It's creating our physical world in this physical place right here. So what happened was Adam could see from this world all the way up the parallel worlds, which are several of categories of worlds, all the way up to where God was projecting the thing that he was seeing. Now, what happens is there's 22 letters to the Holy Alphabet, and God is projecting through the utterances of creation, these 22 letters. Those 22 letters are going through intercalculations down this whole matrix. It comes out to 231 intercalculations. Aleph, Bet, Aleph, Gimel, Aleph, Dalet, Aleph, Hey, Bet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. It's an algorithm, and it comes to 231, but it gets exponential almost immediately. And it's very, very complicated. But what happens eventually, let's say we're talking about a dog, is eventually the C, like a slot machine, yeah? The C, or the Kaf of Kelev, right? The C goes chunk, finally hits at the bottom, Kaf, coming down the next letter, Lamed, next letter, Bet, Kalev, and then all of a sudden, woo, 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 here's a dog, dog. So Adam was actually watching the letters from the upper world coming down the system all the way down until Kalev, Kaf, Lamed, Bet, Kelev. And then he named the dog. He's like, that's a Kelev. And God's like, on the nose, you got it. It's a Kelev. That's a dog. So when God brought each creature to Adam to name it, and it says that Adam could see from one end of the world to the other, it was talking about Adam being able to read the whole creation, the matrix of creation, in the parallel realms until it weaves its way into physicality. So therefore, Adam was our first Kabbalist. He saw all the way through creation, and this is why during the Havdalah ceremony, we look into our fingernails to see the reflection of the torch. The torch has to do with Adam. And we look in our fingernails because our fingernails are translucent. Because to Adam, the world was translucent. At least until he ate from the fruit, the world was translucent. He saw right through it. And only after he ate from the fruit did the world go opaque. And he lost his Kabbalistic gifts, if you will. His ability to see through creation. Our next biggest Kabbalist is Abraham. Abraham was a heavy-duty Kabbalist, and he even left us with a book. Abraham was left the world with a book in print for thousands of years now, called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, and it's all about how God formed creation. Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. And that book is it's been translated into many languages. It's even in English, but don't expect to understand too much of it. But that's also how you can, in it is how you can build a Frankenstein, like they built a Frankenstein in Prague, one of the most famous Frankensteins. In Hebrew, the Frankenstein is called a golem. And there was the golem of Prague, where the Maharal of Prague, the great rabbi of Prague, built a golem, a man-made man. And we learn how to make this man through this golem, through the Sefer Yetzirah. It's the Book of Formation. So Abraham also was a very big Kabbalist. He understood, all the details of the spiritual realms, and he worked very hard to get there. And I'm sure plenty of it was gifted, but a lot of it was his hard work. Then our next Kabbalist that we're going to skip to would be the Jews at Sinai. When the Jews received the Torah at Mount Sinai, it was national prophecy. But once you're getting prophecy, you'll understand that that means you're now a Kabbalist. What do I mean? See, right now, none of us have prophecy. We're all locked into this world. We don't see through creation. So all the step-down conversions of the light coming all the way down to physicality, all those step-down conversions, we don't see any of that. We only are on the other end of the whole creation. So we don't get to see the actual gradations where the power of creation is brought down lower and lower and lower. We don't get to see that. In prophecy, you do get to see it. In prophecy, so what does it mean? Just like, for example, this light right above my head that's shining onto my hand, that light is plugged into a socket that's 220. And all the power that's coming from the power plant in Jerusalem, it's hundreds of, it's probably 100 million volts. I don't know how many volts are coming out of Jerusalem's power plants, but it's powering the biggest city in Israel. That's being converted. There's step-down conversions going lower and lower and lower until it finally hits 220. Now, if there's a power surge and it starts blowing through all the converters, and now each converter, instead of sending down a lower voltage, is sending down the same high voltage. So eventually it would hit this light, or it'd immediately hit the light and blow light to smithereens. That's prophecy. See, normally, we don't get to see what's going on above this world. Normally, we are limited to just seeing this view. And our brains have been specific because your brain is awesome and your brain has a direct access to tap into much more. But you have these things called inhibitors that inhibit your brain from being able to see what's really out there. But God could uninhibit your brain, or he could uninhibit the system to actually send down a much greater power surge. But of course, that would be very dangerous for you. You have to be prepared to be a prophet. You have to be prepared to be able to receive that. So this third examples I'm giving of Kabbalists is the Mount Sinai experience, where everyone at Mount Sinai experienced the entire expression of God's oneness in creation, straight through, unfiltered prophecy for an entire nation. And that's the next example of Kabbalists. Now, there were rabbis who studied the Kabbalah since Mount Sinai and continued to study it for years and years. It was passed along orally for over 1,000 years. But because of the Roman persecution, it had to be written down. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote it down in this book called the Zohar. And it's very cryptic, it's very encoded. And that encoded message that was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai of all the dialogues of our rabbis, of the rabbis of the Mishnah, he basically put their dialogue, but the way the dialogue is, it doesn't read like a newspaper. It's very encoded in order that people don't get the details, the dangerous details of creation. Because the Kabbalah can be dangerous for you, it can be dangerous for others. It includes all kinds of stuff that not everybody should know. You have to be ready to know this stuff. You have to be spiritually prepared for it. There's a lot of criteria involved with knowing this kind of info, and therefore, when he wrote down the Zohar, he wrote down the Zohar in a way that would be only understood by scholars. Those scholars studied the Kabbalah for many years. It was always the higher echelons of Torah scholarship. And eventually it made its way down to the Arizal. The Arizal, he meditated for years on the Zohar to try to kind of crack its code. And he succeeded to crack the code and wrote down, well, his scribe, Rabbi Chaim Vital, wrote down all of his teachings of the uncoded Zohar. So the Zohar was decoded by the Arizal, who's buried in Sfat. That decoding are called the writings of the Ari, which it's funny, the Ari himself didn't write the writings, but his scribe did. They're called the writings of the Ari. It's a very big compendium of uncoded Zohar. It's written in Aramaic. It's very hard to understand. And so the uncoded Zohar, called the writings of the Ari, are actually pretty unintelligible to most people today. Meaning you have to be a massive scholar to understand the writings of the Ari today. So here he thought he was doing, I guess, the world a favor by like uncoding the Zohar, but in our generation, the writings of the Ari are just as coded as the Zohar for most people. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal and the Kabbalists that followed him, especially in the Hasidic movement, they all said that you'll know Mashiach's coming when there will be a thirst for Kabbalah throughout the world, meaning everyone's going to want to know the mystical aspects of creation, that then you'll know it's time for Mashiach. So it's kind of cool that, like, you know, here we are in this wild period of Jewish history. I mean, we're in the ultimate period of Jewish history, the Messianic era. You know, we get to be part of it. We're watching it literally unfold in front of our eyes, you know, right beyond this class you're hearing in Jerusalem is the Temple Mount, you know, like when were Torah classes taught here? You know, we are on the other edge of history. It's really exciting. And all the Kabbalists said that in the end of days there will be a thirst for Kabbalah, and we've all witnessed that as well. And they all said it, like all the key Kabbalists said it. The Baal Shem Tov said it. And, you know, they all said that there will be a great thirst for Kabbalah, and that it's only, and when the Kabbalah goes out there into the world, that we're going to see redemption. Categories of Kabbalah. The first category is study, the study of Kabbalah, and that's understanding how things work. Meaning, it would be one thing to, you know, see the word water or mayim, and then it would be another thing to like dissect it and understand what it really means, meaning it's actually literally two mems and a yud, which is exactly the molecules of hydrogens and oxygen. A yud, the letter yud is like oxygen, right? The letter yud is just floating in the air. It's oxygen. Yud represents like oxygen, and the mems are water or hydrogen. And the actual letter, so when you're studying Kabbalah, you're studying about that stuff. You're studying names of God. You're studying how God creates the world. There's two major fields of study that are considered the biggest ones. One is how God created the world, and the second one's how God runs the world. How God created the world is called Ma'aseh Reshit, or the act of creation. And how God runs the world is called Ma'aseh Merkava, which is a little obscure. It's called the act of the chariot. Chariot, what does that have to do with the chariot? And the answer is the first chapter of the book of Yechezkel, Ezekiel, describes a chariot. And what is this chariot? This chariot is how God actually runs the creation. That's what the chariot is. And it's incredibly difficult to understand both the act of creation and how God runs the world via this chariot. They're extremely difficult to understand, to the point where the Talmud says that you're only allowed to teach somebody how these two subjects are, teach them about these two subjects if they themselves could know it on their own. Which is a very strange thing to say. If they could know it on their own, you don't need to teach it. What it's saying is that you can give clues and indicators, and they would just kind of like nod. They would just kind of nod their head and say, "Oh yeah, I get that." You understand? Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you'll learn something and it's like you intuit it, and it's almost like the teacher's bringing it out of you, but it's really in you. You know what I mean by that? So that's what it's saying. Like, you can only teach the act of creation and the act of the chariot, or how God runs creation is the chariot. You can only teach those things to someone who it's intuitive for them anyway. They're on the level where they have this intuition. And so you're really just drawing it out of them. That's who you can teach it to. You're also only allowed to teach it to 2 people at a time, meaning it's done in groups of 3. Okay, to learn those things. But there's other categories of study. For example, what do things mean? For example, the tefillin. What are these black boxes that we're wearing? So the Torah doesn't describe that, but the Kabbalah does. Kabbalah goes into great detail, into every little law. Like, why does the tefillin have to be above the hairline? Why can't your tefillin be below the hairline? It has to be above the hairline. To the point where it's below the hairline, it's like you said God's name in vain when you made the blessing, if it's below the hairline. It has to be above the hairline because it's got, and so the Kabbalah teaches us it's got to be near the soft spot of the baby. because that soft spot is the window to the brain, to the cerebral cortex, to your frontal lobe of your brain. Because the frontal lobe of your brain, ready for this one? Because the frontal lobe of your brain is an atheist. I mean, what does it do, the frontal lobe? It's just billions of neurons that take in stimulus. Sight, smell, hearing, touch, taste. Well, that doesn't tell me God. When I touch his tail, I don't know God. I have to make, I have to make that shift and say, well, really God's in this stuff. But I have to make that shift inside my brain. So a Jewish man starts his morning with a box that talks about Hashem's oneness, Shema Yisrael, that Hashem is one. He puts that over this part of his head to perhaps impress upon him for his day that Hashem is all there is, and that's reality. So it explains the mitzvah. The same explanation explains mezuzah when you leave your house, to touch that mezuzah before you leave the house, because your home you can create as a sanctuary of godliness. Once you walk out into the city streets, other stuff's going on out there. And before you leave your house, you want to touch that mezuzah and just kind of go, walk out the door and just be like, this is all God too. Everything's God. And you want to use every mezuzah you see. You want to go head over to that mezuzah, touch that one. Okay, you're on your way to a business meeting. Oh, there's a mezuzah on that shoe store over there. Grab that mezuzah, go up, you just walk up Jaffa Street, kissing every mezuzah you find, just that way when you see the train drive by, you just be like, whoa, there's God in the form of a train. So, I just imagine the train going by with like a little face on it, just going like, hello, it's waving at you as it drives by. So the Kabbalah, the other form of study of Kabbalah is all the details of the commandments. What are all those things? What is each of those mitzvahs that we do? And also the prayer book, you got the Jewish prayers that we read. What do you think? These are like just a bunch of like things we got to make our lips busy with? Baruch atah this, Baruch atah that, and, hallelujah that, and like, no, every word has a numerical value. Every word has an essence to it. Every word's taking you, every psalm of King David, you click on that psalm, it takes you to a whole website of discussing what it's really about, what's really happening in there. So it's going into all the details. You got a story about Abraham in the Torah. The Kabbalah is going to go deeply into what that's about. And what is even the name Abraham? And the fact that it equals, when you add it all up, it equals 248. Is that coincidental that there are 248 positive commandments? And Abraham's known for like proactively like going into the world and like making a difference? And that's the positive commandments. His name is 248. This is another thing that the Kabbalistic study is going to teach you. He's called Avraham. Well, doesn't that sound like father? And then it's the name is his first name was Avram. Then he gets this hay in his name. What does it mean to get a hay in your name? You see, Yonatan was Yonatan. Then he gets Yehonatan. Now he's Yehonatan. Sarah was Sarai, and she gets a hay, and that's Sarah. What are these hays people keep getting? Yoshua gets Yehoshua. Why do people keep getting hays? What are these hays all about? You go into Genesis, and you get a small hay. Small hay in the second chapter. I think the fourth line of the second chapter of Genesis, you get a little hay. And it says, these, Elu told us, these are the products of creation. Bihi baram, in their having been created, with a hay, bihi baram. But it's a little hay in the Torah. Why is there a little hay? You're going to have to look at the Kabbalah to understand that. The Kabbalah is going to explain why is there a little hay. Should I tell you why there's a little hay? Yeah. Bihi baram. So our Kabbalists have two teachings off that. One is don't read Bihi baram, rather read Behe baram, that God created the whole world with the hay. Which hay? The final hay of God's name. His name is spelled Yud, and then, right, Hey, and Vav, and Hey. That final hay is what God used to create the world. So it says, these are the products of the heaven and the earth. With a hay, he created them. You need the Kabbalah to know that. And what does it mean that he created the world with a final hay? And why is the hay little? Why is the letter of God's name little? You want the answer for that one too? The reason it's little is because, I mean, think about it. Could there be a more humble being than God? You know, you're God creating the whole world, and yet you don't see him. He's little. He makes himself little. He lets you be big while he just is behind the scenes, you know, like some old bubby or something, you know, who like made the whole meal but like won't take a compliment. You know, God's an old bubby. He creates the whole universe, and there's nothing but him, yet no one sees him. In fact, you even meet people who don't even believe in him. And God still creates them. Still creates them, creates his taste buds and his optical nerves and that are pulling in all this stuff and lets him enjoy the beauty of music, lets him even create music. You could have an atheist violinist using the energy of God to create beautiful pieces on the violin. And God's just like, that's cool. You know, if you want to ignore me, okay. Make some good music though. You know, make people happy. You know, hope people enjoy the music. You know, and I'll protect your hands, even though you're into, extreme sports. So you can keep playing that music. Yeah, and God's like super humble. It's a little hay. The other one is, the other teaching is, Al tikre behibaram, don't read in their having been created, rather read be'avraham. Because the word behibaram in their having been created is the same exact letters as be'avraham, in Abraham. These are the products of heaven and the earth in Abraham. What does it mean that they're in Abraham? Meaning Abraham fulfilled the purpose of having created heaven and earth. Because Abraham made this his life. And so therefore, the heaven and earth were all created basically for Abraham. And not from like an ethnocentric way, like, oh, the world was made for me. You know, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is the whole point of the world was fulfilled by Abraham. Because God created the world for relationship, and Abraham was the one who clawed his way through the physicality of creation and made that relationship. It says the same thing about the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. God created the whole world for the Jewish people. What does that mean? It means we get to walk around like God created the world for us. No, what it means is that we're, by living Torah, by living the mitzvahs, we're developing a relationship, which was the whole point of creation. And because we're fulfilling the point of creation, so it's like the world was created for us. Now, God created the world for everyone, for every being, every mineral, plant, animal, human being. Created it for everybody. But because we, by accepting and living the relationship with God, so it says that the world was created for us because we actually fulfill the creation, the point, which is this relationship. That was a very long explanation of the study of Kabbalah. But you guys get the picture more or less? So we had how God creates the world. We have how he runs the world. That's the chariot. And we have also what are the meanings of the commandments. And we also discussed how do you actually explain the verses of the Torah, whether it's Psalms or it's Genesis or it's a story about Abraham or whatever it is. It's explaining what the creation is all about. The second category of Kabbalah is meditation. It's using names of God. There's many names of God, and you use the names of God and to go on trips, if you will, to trip on the names of God. And to go on these journeys, meditative journeys, you go into meditation and you take these journeys into parallel realms, which we discussed a little bit, going into these parallel realms and going on these journeys. And there's a famous story of the Talmud of 4 great rabbis who actually went on such a journey. And they didn't do so hot in this story. You know, it says that 4 went into the orchard, went into this meditative state called the orchard. Pardes, which is the Hebrew word of an orchard, Pardes, which is where we get the English word paradise, because all words come from Hebrew. Paradise and Pardes, orchard. And the four men went into the orchard, the four rabbis, and only one of the four came out okay. That was Rebbe Akiva. He's the only one who really survived it. And that's meditation of the Kabbalah. So the first was study, the second is meditation, using names of God. Most of the meditations, there's 26 types of meditation. Most of them are microfiche in Hebrew University. You don't meet a lot of people who know how to do Kabbalistic meditation, but there are still some sorts and some forms of meditation that people are doing. It's pretty rare. These days, most people are meditating on their smartphones. Third type of Kabbalistic, using the Kabbalah, the third type is matter manipulation. It's called Kabbalah Ma'asit. It's actually using the names of God that you might have been meditating on to manipulate matter, to actually like bend spoons, if you will. I mean, not that a Kabbalist would ever bend a spoon. I think God would probably go like, you know, if a guy's doing tricks with Kabbalah. You weren't supposed to do tricks with Kabbalah, although there have been a couple irresponsible Kabbalists. Most famous irresponsible Kabbalist who was just like doing party tricks. You know, was it could be JC was doing party tricks, but the biggest, most famous in Jewish history of the party trick Kabbalist was a man by the name of Shabtai Tzvi, who lived several hundred years ago in Europe. He was doing party tricks and getting everybody all excited because it was a very ignorant time. Jews were living in poverty. They may have been literate, but they weren't scholars, and it was tough times. And we were always under the gun of the nations around us. It was not good times. And comes along Shabtai Tzvi to like save the day with his little like, you know, poof, and using God's names for all this stuff. Whatever, that ended in absolute disaster. Like millions of Jews lost the path of Judaism over this guy. And that's why you might have heard, at least in Europeans, Sephardic Jews never embraced this, but at least in the European world, Kabbalah became limited to people who were over the age of 40, knowing all of Torah. They have to be married, they have to have kids, they have to like be super grounded and stable to learn the Kabbalah. The Sephardic Jewry never embraced this ban on Kabbalah or this kind of criteria. They continued studying Kabbalah in, you know, kindergarten. Just to mention regarding that ban is the dangerous Kabbalah is that they want people not studying until they're ready for it because of you know, various reasons. That dangerous Kabbalistic stuff is no longer accessible today, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's not, no one would be able to understand that stuff. I myself, I mean, I've been kind of emphasizing in the mystical traditions of Judaism for over 20 years now. Whenever I find my way to a piece of Torah that's the dangerous stuff, I never can make heads or tails. I don't understand what in the world's going on over there. We're just not on that level anymore. We're not on the level of scholarship anymore to be dangerous, for Kabbalah to be dangerous to ourselves or to anyone else by you having studied it. Is that clear? So we don't have to worry so much about that ban. Matter manipulation was used also responsibly, most notably, and this is a little controversial because a lot of people want to deny this happened, but the first pope was actually a Jewish scholar. And this first pope, who was this great scholar, he was not a pope, he was a rabbi living in Jaffa. He was a fisherman. And to this day, the pope wears a ring that has a fisherman on it from this first pope. But the first pope was actually just a great rabbi. And the Jews were being terribly hassled by the early Christians who were hanging around Israel. And he had an idea. He says, if you give me permission, he went to the sages. He said, if you give me permission, I would like to go to the temple and ask the Kohanim for certain names of God that only they're allowed to use, and I will use them, create miracles, get all the Christians excited about it, and then move them out of Israel. And he says, but I'll do it under one condition, that the punishment for doing such a thing will fall on all of us. I don't want to take all the blame. Meaning I'll be the fall guy, but we're sharing the punishment from heaven for using the names of God for this. And they agreed. He went to the temple and he got the names from the Kohanim, and he started doing acts of wonders for the early Christians. And when they all got like kind of rallied behind him, he says, we're moving to Rome. And everyone's like, what? And he says, that's right. It's the word of God. We're moving to Rome. And all the early Christians were like, Rome it is. You know, we're with Bozo. You know, and they all went to Rome. This was 2,000 years ago. It's the time of the beginning of Christianity. And they moved to Rome, and he became known as the first pope. I'll give you one more example, and that is a group of Kabbalists used the names of God for rain during an extreme drought about, I could tell you exactly how many years ago if I knew any math, but it would be, this is the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, and it was 7 years ago, so it was the 6th year of the previous Shemitah cycle. We needed rain really bad. Israel just did not get any rain. And so these Kabbalists went up in an airplane. Not that Kabbalists need an airplane, but they did it. They made a whole media event out of it. And they went up in an airplane and they flew around Israel, I think 3 times. They flew over Israel, something that wouldn't be recommended today, given the war we're in the middle of. But they flew around Israel 3 times, saying these very specific names of God that have to do with rain, and including the certain supplications that bring rain. And lo and behold, satellite picture, you know, clouds form over the land of Israel. There was no rain in Europe. There was no rain in north of us, nor the rain in Turkey. None of the rain even went over to to Jordan. Literally clouds just formed. By the time they got back to their cars from the airplane, it started pouring rain. I'll never forget the day. And it was pouring rain in Israel. It was in the news that they were doing it. And I remember, because I flew out into that storm, I'm like, oh great, now I got to die because of these Kabbalist storm here. You know, I took off in this storm, and when I landed in New York, I called my wife right away, and I was like, honey, is it still raining? And she's like, it's raining, cats and dogs. You know, it was still raining, and it rained for days, and the rest of the winter continued raining properly. But that was like 3 days of just of a downpour that these Kabbalists pulled off. Because the same group of Kabbalists did an exorcism also in Dimona, where our nuclear power plant is. There was a possession there, and they did this was also live Israeli television, an exorcism on live television. And yeah, actually a lot of people became observant over that while watching that. They're just like, you know, there must be a God, you know, watching the, you know, exorcism going on down there. And this lady had a man's voice, and she was like, it was like trying to strangle her from inside. It was her. How do we know this Kabbalah stuff's true? We're going to close with that. How we know the Kabbalah is true. How do we know this stuff's real? And the answer is very simple. It's just a little bit of you have to know a little algebra. Okay, a little algebra, because A, you know, if A equals B, then and B equals C, then A equals C type thing. So it's like this. I think the real question that one has to ask or get an answer for is the Torah divine? If you know that the Torah is divine, you already have your answer that the Kabbalah is real. Let me explain why. You see, if Torah is divine, if you say the Torah is divine, so now you have a book that's from God, okay? It's totally divine. Well, if you look in the Torah doesn't explain how to do the mitzvahs. It keeps saying, do this, do that, do the other, but it never tells you how. Which means you've got to have an oral tradition to explain how to do things. For example, we already brought up the tefillin. It says, totafot, put totafot between your eyes, but it never explains what totafot are. It tells you on Shabbat, in no uncertain terms, don't do malacha. But it never tells you what malacha is. The Torah tells you to slaughter animals. You want to eat an animal? You got to slaughter it according to my instructions. Oh, great. Let's flip through and find the instructions. Guess what? No instructions. It has to have an oral law. There's no way for our Torah without an oral law. If you don't have an oral law for our Torah, you don't have a Torah. So once you say the Torah is divine, what does that mean about the oral law, the instructions? That they're also divine. It's just the rabbis throughout the generation transmitting down the generations how to do the mitzvahs. How do you actually do them? Most of oral law is just how to do the mitzvahs. I know a lot of people have issues with rabbis and stuff, but really they're just trying to explain how to complete a mitzvah from beginning to end. How do you do the mitzvah? That's the oral law, how to do the mitzvah. Well, we also have this amazing, giant body of information called the Kabbalah, which explains everything else. How God created the world, how God runs the world, what is the real reason behind all the mitzvahs. The Kabbalah on all of that. Well, who are the rabbis that you find in the Zohar, the book that got written down during Roman persecution? Who are the rabbis when you open up the actual Zohar that are in this dialogue with each other? And the answer is the same exact rabbis of the oral law that tell you how to make a pair of tefillin or how to keep Shabbat or how to slaughter an animal. One-stop shop. It's the same dudes. You see, these days, if you want a halachtician, a man who knows Jewish law, you go to this rabbi. You want a Kabbalist? You go to the Kabbalist. In those days, one-stop shop, it was the same guy. It's the same exact guy. So when you open up a Mishnah that's telling you how to build a mikveh, or how to make a pair of tefillin, or how to keep Shabbat, or how to slaughter an animal, when you open up the Mishnah, it says Rabbi Meir said this, Rabbi Akiva said this, Rabbi Shimon said this, Rabbi Tarfun said this. When you open up the Zohar, guess how it reads? Rabbi Akiva said this, Rabbi Shimon said this, Rabbi Meir said this, Rabbi Tarfun said this, Rabbi Ishmael said this, Rabbi Hillel said this. It's the same names. It's the same exact people. So if you're going to trust them for how to keep Shabbat, if you're going to trust them for who is a Jew today, if you're going to trust them for how to make a mikveh and how to judge when someone should get in that mikveh or not, if you're going to trust the rabbis on all of that, which we trust them for all of it, even that you're a Jew today is only rabbinic. We only understand that through the rabbis. The Torah doesn't define it. Everything is rabbinic. So if you're going to trust the rabbis for you being a Jew today, it's the same rabbis who teach us all these amazing mystical secrets of creation. It's the same dudes. One-stop shop. Sorry to call rabbis dudes, but I think these days it might have a little more street credit to call them dudes. But it's one rabbi dude, okay? It's one-stop shop. It's the same rabbis that taught us the Mishnah, meaning the oral law of how to keep the written law, is the same rabbis who taught us the mystical secrets of the Torah. So throughout history, we have the written law. It starts at Sinai, comes down all the way through history. We have it till this day with almost no discrepancies on how to write a Torah. I think there's 5 letters that are in dispute. 5 letters. That's radically accurate. Incredible transmission. And by the way, none of those 5 letters make a difference in the meaning. So it's not even like, it doesn't even make a difference in the actual meaning of those words. Coming down all of tradition is the oral law, how to keep the written Torah. And coming down all the generations is the Kabbalah. It's the 3 pillars of Judaism. The written law, the oral law, which splits into 2. The law itself, and then the Kabbalah, the mystical aspects of Jewish life. And so for us today, our job is to study the Torah, but we want to study as much as possible, so we want to study the written law as much as we can. We want to understand the written law via the oral law, and we also want to understand what it's all about. Today, there's a great thirst for it. People aren't willing to just keep Judaism without knowing what it does. What is it really connecting me to? Today, we all want connection. And the Kabbalah means to receive a relationship, to receive connection, to connect to God, to make Judaism a spiritual practice, not just a bunch of rituals, but to make it spiritual, to take the spirit of the Kabbalah and infuse the rituals with it. And then Judaism is a truly spiritual tradition.